Scotland's richest families poured their entire fortunes into a colonial venture that was doomed before the first ship left port. In 1695, Scotland was desperate. The country was broke. England had locked it out of colonial trade, and every merchant with capital was watching English ships haul wealth from the Caribbean while Scottish vessels sat idle. So when William Paterson, a financier with a bold vision, proposed a scheme to plant a Scottish colony on the Isthmus of Darien in present-day Panama, the entire nation saw a lifeline. This wasn't fringe speculation. The Scottish Parliament passed it, the clergy blessed it, and the money, it came from everywhere. Here's what we're told happened. Scottish colonists arrived in Darien, the environment was hostile, disease killed them, the venture collapsed, and Scotland never recovered financially. The story ends with Scotland broken, forced into union with England in 1707. Simple cause, obvious effect, but that's not really why it cost what it did, or why the damage was so severe. The real story starts with the price tag itself. Paterson convinced Scottish investors that Darien would become a trading hub, a middleman post where goods from Europe would flow east and Asian goods would flow west. Scotland would take a cut of everything passing through. The math looked clean, the risk seemed manageable. By 1696, the Company of Scotland was chartered and began raising capital. They asked for £600,000 sterling. That's roughly £100 million in today's money. In a nation of about 1 million people with a total annual government budget of maybe £100,000, this was unthinkable. But something extraordinary happened. The wealthy didn't hesitate. They couldn't afford to hesitate. Missing this opportunity meant staying poor while England got richer, so they subscribed. Merchants, landowners. Even the church invested their liquid wealth. By early 1698, the company had raised nearly the entire sum. Money came from Edinburgh, Glasgow, Stirling, and smaller towns. Entire family fortunes were pooled. Widows invested their dowries. Merchants mortgaged their trading posts. This wasn't diversified investment, it was a national bet. All the chips on one table, all the chips on Darien. Now here's where the accepted story fails. Yes, disease killed colonists. Yes, the environment was harsh, but those weren't the real killers. The real problem was that Paterson's entire premise was built on a fatal misreading of geography and power. Darien wasn't a neutral trading post, it was Spanish territory. Spain had no interest in a Scottish middleman, and more crucially, England, which was negotiating with Spain, actively worked to sabotage the scheme. England's King William Roman III issued a proclamation forbidding English colonies from supplying the Scottish settlement. No food, no reinforcements, no medical support. When the first Scottish fleet arrived at Darien in 1698, they were isolated completely. The tropical environment did its work, yellow fever, dysentery, malaria, but isolation made it lethal. They weren't just fighting disease, they were fighting it alone. The first colony failed, hundreds died, survivors limped home, but Scotland's merchant class didn't accept defeat. They sent 3 more expeditions between 1699 and 1700. More money, more ships, more people, more graves. Each wave was smaller than the last. Each was driven by the same logic: we've already lost so much, one more push might recover it all. By 1700, the company admitted defeat. The remaining colonists were evacuated. Of the roughly 500 Scots who went to Darien, around 2,000 died. The financial losses were staggering. Of the £600,000 invested, almost nothing was recovered. For a nation Scotland's size, it was catastrophic, not just economically but psychologically. Here's the part that explains the real cost. Scotland's merchant class had liquidated. They'd converted their productive assets, land, trading posts, inventories into cash to buy company shares. When the scheme failed, that capital was gone. It didn't move to another investment. It didn't generate returns elsewhere. It vanished. The economy didn't shrink gradually. It seized. Families that had been wealthy for generations found themselves insolvent. Credit networks fractured. Trust evaporated. Banks that had extended credit to investors now called in debts. Debtors' prisons filled. The social fabric didn't just tear, it unraveled. And because Scotland was a small, interconnected society, the collapse spread everywhere at once. By 1707, 7 years after Darien's final collapse, Scotland was in no position to resist union with England. The country was economically shattered. The merchant class, which might have fought for independence, was too busy managing personal ruin to organize political resistance. The Act of Union passed. Scotland lost its parliament, its sovereignty, and its economy was absorbed into England's. Was the union inevitable? Maybe, but Darien didn't just fail, it removed Scotland's ability to negotiate. The scheme cost money, lives, and time. More importantly, it cost confidence. Once investors watched their fortunes evaporate on a venture that seemed certain, they stopped taking risks. Capital froze, enterprise slowed. The economy that might have resisted England's pressure simply couldn't. This is the pattern we see over and over. A nation desperate for growth bets everything on one idea. The idea seems rational, even inevitable. The money is real. The commitment is absolute. Then reality collides with assumption and the entire structure collapses. not because the idea was evil, but because it was built on a misunderstanding of the world, and no amount of money can fix a misunderstanding. The Darien Scheme cost Scotland roughly 20% of its entire national wealth in a single bet. It wiped out the merchant class that might have led industrialization. It created a psychological trauma around risk that lasted generations, and it opened the door to union not through conquest but through exhaustion. Scotland didn't lose its independence to an army, it lost it to math that didn't work. So when we ask why Darien cost what it did, the answer isn't disease or geography. It's that an entire nation mistook confidence for knowledge. They saw opportunity and couldn't afford to miss it. They moved all their chips to the center of the table, and when the hand was revealed, they had nothing left. That's the real price tag, not the pound 600,000 invested. The centuries it took to recover from losing it. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research. Subscribe so you don't miss the next financial bubble that rewrote history. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research.